Hey, this is Rob Zombie, writer and director of the film you are about to watch, which is Halloween 2. And let's get it started here with, here's a little piece of business at the beginning that sort of explains Michael's visions of the white horse. And I noticed many times when I was in a theater, most people didn't bother to read that, so they were immediately confused as soon as the movie started. Here's a shot I stole from the first Halloween. On the one day we had snow that we never used. We went back and color timed it and took out the green trees and replaced the sky and got a nice free exterior of a Smith's Grove sanitarium. Here's our new young Michael Myers, Chase Vanek and Sherry Moon Zombie as Deborah Myers, his mom. And here's the white horse toy that later just is significant in his memory. It doesn't cause him to kill or anything like that, but it's just a significant moment. And this set we built spontaneously. This whole scene was spontaneous. In fact, the whole white horse thing was just something I thought of one day when we were shooting. I saw a white horse running in the field in the morning when I was driving to set, and it just looked so surreal that I came up with this white horse idea. And this room that they're in is actually a pool house that was behind the house we used for the bracket house that you'll later see. And our art department, who are just amazing, overnight transformed it into this sanitarium room with, you know, no notice and no money.
I want to see. Okay? Cheer up. All right. Okay, no more gloom. Okay. Okay.
And there's some audio from the end of our first film for those who forgot that Laurie shot Michael in the head. Here's the town square, which was, I can't remember if this was Covington, Georgia or not, but somewhere down in Georgia, where it basically rained every single day. So all the rain in the movie are not rain towers. It's actually just the rain that was constantly falling. And what was great about shooting down here was we didn't have any police or anyone to lock off the streets. We just shot because there were no people around anyway. The streets were so deserted at night that we could literally walk our actress down the middle of the street without fear of her being hit by a car. And the only time I thought she'd be hit by a car was when Brad Dourif pulls up behind her here in the police car. Of course, his scout, Taylor Compton, is Laurie Strode, stumbling down the street, and she is quite a trooper here because it was freezing cold, and she was soaking wet all night long. And if you could see the camera crew behind the camera, they're all bundled up in giant parkas in front of space heaters and things, and she's out there wearing nothing, frozen solid.
Stop, sweetie, stop.
And even, you know, so she never gave up.
Laurie, give me the gun.
This here is the one scene that really connects to the end of the last film where we last saw her shoot Michael. And I just thought we needed one brief moment that connected it. We couldn't find the wardrobe or any of this, so we quickly had to piece together something that was matched the last movie. And a couple people have pointed out that the pattern on her shirt there is wrong. But whatever. If you're looking at the pattern on her shirt, you get problems. This was actually the first day of filming. One of the first scenes we shot, and we knew it was going to be a long movie because it just started off horrible and went downhill. We had a million problems on this day. We started the first day of shooting way behind schedule because we had decided to use local sound and video, and they just weren't prepared for how fast and furious we were going to move, so they were having a panic attack 24/7. So they were, you know, we shot a lot of this MOS because they could never get the sound working, and we had to go in and dub it later because we move really fast, and if people can't keep up, they tend to panic. Here is Malcolm McDowell obviously being shoved in the ambulance, and that was a different Myers house than the one from the first movie because obviously the first movie was shot in South Pasadena, and we actually took another house there and rebuilt the facade of it to look as similar as possible, but the houses in that area obviously didn't look like it.
Heavy?
What the hell happened to this kid anyway?
I don't know. I thought it was car accident. I'm very confused.
At least neurosurgery cleared her head. We don't have to do anything with that.
Right.
Here's some pretty intense special effects work by Wayne Toth on Laurie's broken fingers and whatnot. The other guy scrubbing up there was an actual doctor who was just there to advise, and somehow he worked himself into the scene and basically had most of the dialogue too. I don't know how that happened, but He was really good, and he advised us on everything. We wanted everything to be completely real. And, you know, at all times we were following exact procedure as he said it would be. We would ask him questions about, you know, which wounds would they attend to first? Would they clean her up? Would they do this or that? And, you know, we did it by the book. And all the other, there's the one doctor, the female doctor, Caroline Williams, who people might remember from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. She's really the only actor in there. All the EMTs and the nurses and the doctors are all real people. Same with this. You know, there's a couple actors in there. The girl in the scene here with the ponytail lifting Michael Myers into the van is actually Tyler Maine, who plays Michael Myers. That's his wife. So she was hanging around that day, so she jumped in the uniform. And again, more disgusting surgery. And Dayton Calley, who a lot of people might remember from Deadwood, and Richard Brake as the two, coroner guys here. This was all done pretty fast and furious that night. We always had, we had to shoot anywhere from 9 to 12 pages a day because as we were shooting, our schedule kept getting chopped off.
I'd say that there's nothing obvious about anything that happened here tonight. Not a goddamn thing.
We had one day of aerial photography, and this obviously is one of the scenes.
Son of a bitch was heavy, huh? 6 guys to lift 1 stiff. That's one for the books.
These were some scenes. This is a scene here that we had our disastrous day where someone x-rayed our film at the airport. And obviously it took place on the worst possible day. It was a long, long, miserable day of shooting that we couldn't wait to end. And then the next day we found out all the film was no good. This scene here was one of the scenes that had to be redone. And unfortunately, Richard Brake lives in London, so he had to fly all the way back from London, London to do this. And it was a bit of a fiasco, but he came back and he was incredibly jet lagged, but he nailed it as usual. He was great. But it's very, very disheartening to everyone involved when you find out that 18 to 20 hours worth of miserable work was for nothing. You know, to go back and have to redo it, it's just you want to kill yourself. And part of the redo is coming up here, which is the cow that they're about to hit. That was a real comedy of errors nonstop. So they had rigged a cow that it was like something out of Monty Python. They'd rigged a cow that the van was supposed to hit, and they were like, "Oh, don't worry, this van's gonna crush like a walnut when it hits this thing." And it hit the cow and sent the cow flying through the air like it was made out of paper mache. It didn't do anything. And they rigged it again, wasting our whole night, and it didn't work. And then finally, on the 3rd try, a week later, a different effects team came in and they nailed it in 1 try. But that was another fiasco. Here's some more great effects work by Wayne Toth. And this scene we squeaked out as fast as possible because, as usual, it was starting to rain. We had a lot of trouble with the. There were brief moments when it wasn't raining, so we'd start shooting, and then you would see the drops coming down. And if you look close in some scenes, it's raining, then not raining, then it's raining. Then we just didn't know what to do. We were carrying rain towers with us at all times to try to match, but the weather was so insanely unpredictable. But all this here was part of the reshoot when we realized our film was damaged and we had to go back. And unfortunately, we didn't really get any extra time to redo. We just had to redo it and pack it back onto our already completely undoable schedule. But we got it done. Luckily, cast and crew were amazing, and they never complained. At least, not to me anyway. And coming up here is really our first reappearance of Michael. And a lot of people seem confused sometimes where the reality ends and the dreams begin, but this is all still the reality part of the movie. The dream begins once Laurie wakes up in the hospital, so that's coming up. So this is still, I didn't explain it. Clearly Michael got shot in the head in the first movie, but how the hell are you going to explain something like that? You just kind of let it go. And we'll just say Laurie's a bad shot and he was grazed or whatever. Really, what are you going to do? This was and I've read some other funny things where people have said, oh, it's ridiculous that they hit a cow. But this whole cow thing was based on a true story that happened to a friend of mine where him and his friends were out driving on this road where their headlights off. It was pitch dark, and there was just suddenly they turned the headlights on and there was a cow standing in the middle of the road, and they only had time to scream the word cow, as these guys did, and then they smacked into a cow and it crushed their car. So it can happen. Cow can jump out at any moment at you. We filmed these little inserts here of the neck cutting much later. We were very far into the editing process, almost done. Actually, we were about a week from release, and we went back and filmed those little inserts. It almost seemed like we never actually stopped filming the movie. It was actually very, very bizarre. This is a nice severed head. And now Michael looks off here and sees the first vision of his mother and the memory of the white horse. This is still reality, but it's only in Michael's mind, obviously. Nobody can see these things but him. That's why I thought it would be interesting to get a glimpse into the way Michael perceives the world. I believe this was also part of our damaged... Yeah, this was damaged film, too, that we had to redo. Which was really a drag, because, that's a gigantic horse, and it was... it's a little tricky to deal with, but that night it was being super mellow. It almost looks fake standing there. And by that point, Sherry was pretty used to the horse. First, she was a little scared. Now, this begins our dream sequence. With Laurie waking up in the hospital, and the endless loop of Moody Blues playing Nights in White Satin. Once fake rain. That's actually fake rain for once. We actually made some fake rain. This was an abandoned hospital we found, and it was pretty disgusting, and we had to fix it all up. All the local people there, a local actress playing the nurse there, sleeping. I don't remember her name. This was within the first couple days of shooting also, I believe. Just a lot of hospital work. I think we were in the hospital for about 3 days. And Octavia Spencer as the nurse, and Caroline. We just I don't think any of this was in the script. They kind of got together, and they were easy to work. Whenever actors are easy to work with, then you can kind of improvise these little scenes. We would go off and improvise, and we'd sort of nail it down, then basically pick a section, and they would rehearse that. And the funny thing is, the conversation that Octavia is about to have on the telephone that we'll get to in a minute, is a conversation I overheard 5 minutes before we shot it. Is Danielle Harris, obviously, is Annie Brackett in the hospital here. I believe when we shot it, I had her play it as if she opens her eyes and looks at her, but then I decided to keep it that she's out. And there was a little conversation back and forth. I mean, Danielle didn't talk, but there was a little mention of their friend Linda, who had been killed and whatnot, but then I thought, might be confusing to people, so I didn't even reference it.
You cannot be in.
And by this point, we had messed up Scout pretty good with the bruises and the stitches. And there was really good stitch work under those pads, which I'm not sure why we went to all that trouble, since we never took off those pads. It was kind of a big waste. And there's our editor, Glenn Garland, playing the voiceover of the guy in the intercom. So, I think the conversation may have already went by. I don't know. I'll just move it along. It's getting confusing. Anyway, so she turns around, and we're still in the dream, coming up on Michael's first appearance.
I need something for my head.
We tried to make this as interesting as possible, because shooting in a hospital can get pretty boring, because every hallway and every turn it's made to look the same. So we just kept decorating this one area and changing things out. We didn't run all over the whole hospital, because most of it was in such a wreck. This scene coming up here is something I improvised in the night. We actually had a stunt woman who was going to double Octavia. Michael was going to attack, and she was going to get thrown through the glass, and it was going to be this whole big scene. But as I always tend to do, I seem to always eliminate the stunts, because they start looking very stunty, and you can't really show the actor's face. So then I just decided to go with something simple like this. And the slit face appliance was something that was left over from another scene where Michael was going to encounter these cops at the Myers house later. and we had done this appliance for him to cut one of the cops' faces. It was a female cop. But with the days that got cut, that was one of the scenes I did have to sacrifice because there was just no time to get to it. So luckily we had this leftover appliance that wasn't molded to Octavia's face, but it fit pretty good. And Wayne is always pretty can-do about making things work, and he did. Here's some more inserts that we shot later. We always had the stabbing, and I always wanted Michael to be completely ballistic when he stabbed here, and he was. And we only had this, but then we decided to go back and get the inserts on her face hitting the floor, and the knife going in was shot way, way, way after the fact, and just a tiny, tiny little room actually out on a ranch where we shot the Devil's Rejects. There was this boiling hot little room. We went in there and just shot all these inserts. This was another thing just made up on the day. This is the first nurse that was sleeping in the room when Laurie Strode wakes up. And, I don't know, Wayne had made these ripped out eye appliances for something. I don't even remember what. They weren't meant for this, but, you know, decided to use them here. And Moody Blue's still playing, obviously. Same thing that, since she wasn't supposed to be stabbed in the head, she was supposed to be thrown through the glass. We had rigged all that. We didn't even have a knife that would work, so quickly they went and sawed a knife in half and sewed it into her hair and made that work. We really only had one good staircase, so she's basically falling down the same staircase over and over and over, and we're changing out the signs. We doubled all this with a stunt girl, but Scout always seemed to take it as a challenge to outfall the stunt girl, so no matter how hard the stunt girl would throw herself down the stairs, Scout would then go and throw herself harder down the stairs. So we never actually doubled her in the movie at this point. I think we did at some other point, but not yet. It was always her falling down the stairs. This is in the basement of the hospital, leading up to a scene that was cut from the theatrical. That was a minor thing that we created the morning of. I saw this area here that I called the pit, and we opened up the floor, and quickly that morning I remember rolling in and asking my first idea, can we get 25 extras down here in hospital garb and throw them in this pit that Laurie comes upon to just play upon the fact that Michael has killed everyone in the hospital and sort of taken them down in the basement and shoved them in this pit. And, you know, it was just one of those spur-of-the-moment things I created. And I eventually cut it because couldn't really quite figure out how to make it fit in our quickie editing schedule. But later, when we came back to it, it made sense, and we included it in the director's cut. And it just was we just had 20 actors. She fell on top, she crawls out, and then heads out down to the where the axe is. And there's a brief moment here where she stops and tries to get the axe that later Michael will smash and grab. That was a little bit of business just to show where everyone had gone. And this is the true exterior of the hospital, and of course it's raining, so we had to continue the scene on in the rain. And it wasn't just rain, it was always freezing cold rain. Little axe gag. And then out into the rain here. This rain was actually created with rain towers. We had several rain towers, and we must have, I don't know how much water we wasted that night, but it was ice cold as usual. And we filmed this all very quickly, because once again we were shooting in the shortest nights of the year. So we would get on set, I swear to God, we'd get on set, rehearse it once, fire up the rain, and the sun would start coming up. We would get very few takes at it, but this was one very miserable night for Scout. One of many miserable nights to come, obviously. We built all this, there was nothing there, it was just an empty parking lot. And we actually had an incredibly hard time finding an empty parking lot. That's the parking lot of a local high school that will figure into it heavily later. We built this shack, except somewhere along the lines, this shack was supposed to be a breakaway shack. And nobody got that information somehow in the construction department, and they built this shack so sturdy you couldn't knock it over with a bulldozer, except nobody told us that until we wanted to destroy it. Here's Tyler coming out. I believe he's wearing a wetsuit under his jumpsuit. And he was freezing cold, so you can only imagine how cold Scout was just wearing that thin hospital gown. I mean, she was shivering. I'm surprised surprised we didn't kill her, actually. And Richard Reilly driving up is Buddy the Night Watchman, you know, Buddy Bear the Night Watchman, which is part of the dream because there's a scene in the movie where Laurie Strode has a teddy bear named Buddy, so it's sort of just a reflection of her teddy bear that as him as a person within her dream. A minor thing that nobody ever notices. This was all done super quick. You could see the water getting all over the lens. We didn't have much time to do this. And I'm trying to remember what was specific about this. I think this was all over one night. We did it all in one night. We were going to come back, try to come back and fix it. That really wasn't meant to happen. The door just didn't shut good, so we just incorporated into the movie that the door didn't lock. Now this shack is tiny, and we at all times we had 2 camera guys crammed in there and 2 focus pullers, so people were just tripping all over each other. Moody Blues on TV again. And it was pretty chaotic. Filming in the rain is miserable. Always sounds like a good idea, and then you do it, and it's just like miserable. It goes very, very slow.
Okay, just please. It'll just take a second. No, honey. It'll just take a second. The car is...
Yeah, you can hear it in her voice. She was just like, her teeth were chattering through the whole thing. And we had a waiting van that was warm that she would run to as fast as she could before she, froze to death. But a lot of times, there'd be camera problems due to the rain, and she'd have to be, we'd have to lock her in this, get ready to shoot, and she'd be just sitting there dying, waiting for us to roll camera. But she never complained, ever. Some people complain about everything, and some people complain about nothing. She was never complained. Almost to a fault. We might have killed her. She needs to complain sometimes. So here we leave her alone, and we're just waiting for something to happen. Now, coming up is the whole thing about the shack being breakable. We thought the shack had been made out of balsa wood, and Michael could basically smash it to pieces with an axe. That's what I thought. That's what first ADs thought. That's what Tyler thought. That's what everybody thought. But one of the producers neglected to tell us that he had taken away the budget to do that and had just had the construction people build a completely structural shack. So you can see when Tyler starts trying to break through it with the axe, he can barely break through it because it's completely rock solid. He does break through it eventually because he took it as a challenge that he was going to smash through it, but it was tough because, his hands are frozen, the axe is wet, and this thing is a completely solid structure. But he ripped it apart. Smacking Buddy with a rubber axe, which we later fixed in digitally because obviously it was wobbling around. We had a stunt guy, didn't use him. The only time we used the stunt guy here was just in this wide shots, so as to not be a dick and make the real actor lay there in the puddle. We had the stunt guy who was just laying there, playing the dead body. But now you can really see, and that's all real glass. Luckily, someone asked that question, and we replaced it with candy glass, but that was a very dangerous situation that had been set up here that was not trickling down to the people on set. There was a lot of fishy business going on. So, get a little bit of Michael stalking, and the mask looked particularly good wet, so we just kept that going. More Moody Blues. And now we try to smash the shack, and it almost doesn't work. Coming up here, I think. We do a lot of window breaking because we knew we could break the windows, but we would have to have them do a few hits, then we'd rip off some boards, and then someone would come in with a saw and cut away, and some hammers, because it was just hard to get through and dangerous. We had so little candy glass, or rubber glass really, that we kept picking up the same bits of rubber glass and basically just throwing them at Scout so it looked like debris was raining down. It comes across pretty effective when it's all cut together and you add the music, but at the time when we were filming it looked pretty ridiculous. And as you can see here coming up, when he comes in, the sky behind him is kind of blue because the sun was up, but we didn't have a way to tent it since it was raining. Now here's her coming out of her dream. We begin the second reality portion of our movie. On screen, on the TV is a little scene from Night of the Living Dead when the militia's out hunting the zombies. Alice Cooper was nice enough to lend us the rights to use that poster in the background, and a lot of other people were very cool.
Come on. He's dead. He's fucking dead.
In the theatrical, it plays as 1 year later, but it was originally conceived as 2 years later, so in the director's cut, I've made it 2 years later because it makes more sense. You know, Laurie Strode is a mess. You know, she's very different from the girl we left in the last movie. She's, you know, her parents are dead, or the people she thinks are her parents are dead, or her friends are dead. She's scarred. She's a mess. She's, you know, she's hooked on her prescription drugs. And since Sheriff Brackett was really the only one, played by Brad Dourif, that knows the secret of her life, he feels so guilty that he's taken her in to live with him and his daughter, Annie.
God, don't say anything to her.
So Sheriff Brackett is clearly the frazzled single dad who cannot hold it together.
I think I'm gonna get me one of them sticky buns.
And when I talked to Brad about how he wanted to play it, he was like, "Oh, trust me, I get it." He was very sympathetic about playing sort of the dad who was at the end of his rope and just feeling old and tired. He showed up for the first day of shooting and his hair had grown really long. He thought I wanted him to cut it, but I decided to keep it long and keep him a little scruffier, as if, you know, since the events, Sheriff Brackett had just been fed up with life and he's ready to retire, and, you know, he's just as damaged as everyone else. And the two girls here, you can see, you know, wear the scars of the events they survived in the first film quite clearly on their faces.
Just a little. God. Just when I think I can get back to something.
Here's a continuation of the breakfast scene where in the theatrical cut we really saw that Laurie and Annie appeared to have a nice relationship, and in reality I filmed it as if they have a very turbulent relationship. And Laurie feels very much responsible for Annie's disfigurement and everything that's gone on in their relationship. And they're ready to battle at the drop of a hat. And even though Annie gives her this one day at a time type advice, at first we think Laurie goes for it, but then boom, it's like the bomb explodes. And Laurie goes into her sort of like 0 to 100 rage that she speaks about later. You know, she feels that nobody understands, even though Annie's in the same boat, and Annie's sick of, you know, Annie's sort of taken on the role of the mother in the relationship, which in the first film, Laurie was the responsible girl and Annie was sort of the party girl. And now it's like Laurie's the wild one. And Annie has, you know, it's like she's the mom taking care of Laurie and Sheriff Brackett. And it creates a very different dynamic between the two. It makes for a much darker, more depressing film. Which leads us to a very different therapist scene than in the theatrical. You know, she starts off talking about the dreams in a very similar fashion, but now we see that the dreams are, you know, really leading to her problems with Annie, of which the therapist now will ask about. You know, originally I filmed this very, very different ways because I wasn't sure which character threads would really run through the movie.
I know Michael Myers is dead. I shot him in the fucking head. I know he's not gonna come back just because of some stupid holiday.
This is all the same in both cuts. But Laurie's, you know, in this version, she just is more of a mess, basically, and she goes from bad to worse. She's not holding it together, clearly on any level.
So that's the reality that we have to heal you from.
And here's some more new material coming up here.
In recovery.
So basically, I just have to wait until my brain.
Till her brain heals. And then, you know, the therapist asks about Annie, and we start getting some insights into how Laurie feels about Annie now that Annie is just a bad memory rather than her good friend. Which really becomes, you know, something more significant in the movie now when you have this information, because you see that there's a lot of guilt on both sides and that Laurie has actually pushed Annie away. The tragedy has not brought them together but pushed them apart, and she's sort of gone out and got her new friends and sort of created a new Laurie Strode, much like the new Dr. Loomis, where she doesn't want to be the old Laurie Strode. She wants to be the new Laurie Strode, and that she has uncontrollable rage.
That snaps, and I get this 0 to 100 rage, and I just want to go up to her, and I just...
And we start seeing the same early on here, the sort of the tendencies that young Michael Myers had of just being unable to control his rage. And it ties them, it ties the characters together better in a way, and you start seeing all the underlying similarities. And also here's the first hint of the white horse, where the therapist has this Rorschach painting on the wall, and Laurie notices it, and she looks at it, and she says she sees a white horse. And does that mean that she's sane or crazy? And it's just the first little hint about things to come. Which once this came out of the movie, later on, due to our such incredibly accelerated post schedule, sometimes you make editing decisions that ultimately you regret, and that's why. Thank God for the director's cut. You put it all back in, and the movie makes sense again.
The natives are getting restless. You were supposed to be here 45 minutes ago.
And now, in stark contrast to the damaged lives of Laurie, Annie, and Sheriff Brackett, comes Dr. Loomis, who, when we last saw him, he seemed to be dead, but he's obviously survived everything quite well, and he's wearing expensive clothes with his publicist, staying at the best hotel he can find, and loving every minute of it. Even though he's scarred on the inside, he shows nothing on the outside. He's become a complete Hollywood player, sold his soul for money. When you think back to the first movie, when we first see him, he's kind of this like hippie child psychologist who's trying to be helpful, and now he's just this sort of like jive Hollywood guy trying to sell books.
Look, can you just level with me? Is there going to be a problem today?
You are quite an odd one, aren't you? I mean, look at you. Are you color coordinated? What pink clogs and this orange thing? What are you, a clam digger or something?
Mary Birdsong is his publicist, who came into the production at the last second. For some reason, the studio was super obsessed with who would play the publicist. Every once in a while, they would hyper-focus on a certain role, and this one in particular. And no matter who was around, they just were like, no. And finally, the night before, they were like, oh, maybe because we'd gone through every person in the world, I finally convinced them how great Mary was, and she jumped on a plane and flew in cold, and we threw her into the wardrobe, and she, again, was another actor who was completely jet-lagged from having no setup time. We never had any real rehearsal time with the actors, which unfortunately is always a drag. This was a funny day. Here's the exterior of Uncle Meats, the record store where Laurie works, where we meet Howard Hessman and Brea Grant, who is her new friend, her new hip friend that she sort of, in a way, replaced Annie with her new hipper friends. The exteriors of this were a little weird to shoot because the night before, Georgia had gotten a blizzard, and it had dumped 8 inches of snow suddenly everywhere. So we had to go outside and try to figure out how to melt all the snow, because it went from looking like fall to a winter wonderland in the course of a couple hours. It was bizarre. Howard was the perfect choice after meeting him and hanging out with him for some sort of left-wing kind of righteous hippie, old hippie guy, because that's sort of how he is in person anyway, so he was perfect.
Are you gonna come and rock balls with Harley and me at the Phantom Jam?
And the Phantom Jam, which becomes significant later, and they brief mention of it. Laurie Strode always wearing some sort of like DC hardcore punk rock shirt. All the people in those bands were very cool and let us use everything. They loaded us up with all kinds of gear everywhere you look. I never wanted anything to be phony, so we always wanted to reach out and make sure that we had real stuff everywhere. The Circle Jerks records and Black Flag and Government Issue, Minor Threat stuff everywhere. And Frank Zappa, Allman Brothers. I mean, you can never just use everything. You have to reach out to every single person to get the permission, and we went crazy. Our clearances department were working overtime so we could get clearance on all this stuff, but we got it. For some reason, I always had the vision of that giant picture of Frank Zappa on the toilet, and it was incredibly difficult to clear that, but we got it. And then kick out the jams, MC5 we used here, which, we got a nice letter from Wayne Kramer from the MC5 afterwards. Excited that we used the song. Here we go back to the main hotel. We had one nice day, and it was with Malcolm. We shot in a luxurious hotel in Atlanta. His scenes in the lobby, these scenes, and later in his hotel room. Because most of the time we're out in a field in the rain. In this version, it's pretty similar to the theatrical, except there was just more business at the press conference. You know, we jumped right to the questions in the theatrical, but here I let Loomis kind of go through his opening spiel about the Freudian ties of Michael and his mother and how Loomis is the surrogate father, which starts making a lot of what we see in the movie make more sense, and why Dr. Loomis is so significant to Michael and why his mother's so significant. Whereas once we lost this, it just started seeming like, oh, people are seeing ghosts, and we have no real reason for it. So again, you know, what may have just seemed like a disposable chit-chat becomes real, you know, character-driven moments that help explain the things that are going on. And again, you know, in the quest to tighten things up too much in the editing process, you start really losing the heart and soul of the characters.
You never really made it clear whether you believe it was nurture or...
And again here, Loomis answers this question.
I would like to answer it in part...
Actually, I don't even know if that question was in the theatrical, but he has this great quote where he takes a George Bernard Shaw quote and twists it around in order to incorporate Michael Myers into it. And it just really helps to show Malcolm. You know, it's great for Malcolm because Malcolm's a great actor and gives him some flair to display. He's not just running around yelling catchphrases about Michael Myers. It gives him, you know, some pretty choice dialogue to play around with, and he does a good job with it.
Famine and Michael Myers.
And it builds up that he's out there on his book tour more, loving every minute of it. He's a celebrity. So now when this question about does he feel responsible for the deaths is asked, it, you know, she comes in and ruins the party as opposed to it just happening.
I have tremendous sympathy for all the families involved. And do I personally feel responsible, ma'am? No, I do not. And I've said that many times.
This was the day, I remember right before we started shooting this, was when the news came that all the film from the night before was destroyed. So all of our spirits were rock bottom. It's really hard to be told that everything you've just killed yourself doing is destroyed, and now you've got to like start over. But we had a brief moment of feeling crappy, then we jumped back in and started doing all this. I remember this was a tricky day for Malcolm because it was such a bunch of wordy dialogue, and I think he was having a sugar crash, and suddenly he had some orange juice and he was jumped back to life. But I remember it was stressing him out for a while. Here we were out in a field filming this. I remember this was actually the sun was coming up. We were trying to get that just so we could get the natural light. Remember that grass was soaking wet and pretty tall, and Sherry was pretty terrified to walk across it. She was freezing at all times in that dress, ice cold. But she was convinced there were rats and snakes and other creatures in the grass. So it's pretty funny. And Tyler and all of it, we're all down in the grass with the camera crew. Everybody's soaking wet. This to me always looked like a fake set, even though it's the real barn that was in the field. For some reason it looked fake. Sometimes real things look fake. Michael's first real interaction with his vision of his mother. And this, we introduce young Michael so that we know that from now on, whenever young Michael speaks, it's the mind of, everything's the mind of adult Michael. What his mom says, what he says, it's all in his own mind, but it's a way to create some kind of communication. Because the problem I had in my mind was, in the first movie, I had Michael Myers could have a voice due to the fact that we had a lot of young Michael talking, but in this movie I didn't want Michael to not have a voice. So that was the device I created. Here's an additional photography we did several months later. We actually shot this in Connecticut on a small airport landing strip that pretty much looked just like the field in Georgia we had shot in. And Mark Boone and Betsy Rue and Dwayne Whitaker came in one day and shot this. They were all great to work with. And by this point, the nights were very, very short. We had this elaborate thing planned, and as always, never quite works out the way you want. But this looks beautiful. We knew that we had it. We didn't want it to be just them attacking. We knew we wanted to be kind of artsy and weird, and I always had this vision that the truck would look like a UFO almost in the field. So we devised this plan with Brandon, our DP, that, you know, they'd basically always be backlit, and it was... We added in a lot of fog, but it was pretty foggy out there anyway. It's pretty much how it looked in real life. And again, you can see it worked out great, because even though this was much later, we shot this in like July, it was freezing cold for some reason. You could see everyone's breath. So it still had a good like fall look in the mid, you know, so... That was one thing I had trouble achieving in the first film by shooting in, you know, summertime in California. You can't quite get that cold fallness. But it was always the appropriate weather. Now again, working with dogs never seems to work. We hired this dog. We were auditioning dogs, and the only thing this dog had to do was bark. And it was the one thing it would not do. We could not get this dog to bark no matter what it needed. We added the barking later, obviously, but coming up later, you'll see how useless the dog was for us. So this is the first real appearance of new Michael putting on his mask. So I decided to slow it down and sort of milk it a little bit, so we really have our Michael putting on his mask iconic moment like we did in the first film. Now, you can see the sky is a little bit blue. We're already losing our night. So the eye slash was an insert done later, as was any of the stabbing or impaling we did later, because we ran out of time. We just had to blast through this. And then down here on the ground, we shot that later on a soundstage of Dwayne down on the ground, but it matches perfectly. You can't tell. And here again, I decided that, you know, things are pretty frantic, but it's decided to strip out the sound, slow it down, and really milk the moment of his attack. Here's where we shot this scene obviously in continuity because we had to, because we didn't want to be replacing glass on windows because we couldn't. And at this point, we're out of time, so I came up with the idea we'll just finish it off in one big wide shot because there was no other time. I mean, as soon as I yelled cut after this, it was like the sun was up and we were done. Now, all we needed for this dog to do is bark at Tyler. And he barked once, and there it is. He stood in front of that dog for 10 minutes doing everything he could to antagonize it, and that dog would not bark. Now we're back to the Brackett house with their pizza scene.
Starving like Marvin.
This is one of my favorite scenes to shoot, and actually is one of my favorite scenes in the movie just because it's just a nice little scene between the three people, which we don't get a lot of. This is really the only really true scene between these three characters.
Who's Lee Marvin?
Did I stutter?
Paint Your Wagon, The Professionals, Lee Marvin?
The Lee Marvin thing was funny because I did get to rehearse this scene with these actors, and that's probably why it works well. And I remember when Brad was doing the whole Lee Marvin thing, I wasn't sure if Danielle was kidding, but I don't think Scout had any idea who Lee Marvin was either. So it was pretty funny. So Brad actually sort of was going on some of this rant that wasn't in the script, trying to actually explain it to the actors. And it was so funny, I just added it in the script because it was just so natural of him trying to explain to these young girls who Lee Marvin was.
Little dead, rotting flesh never
Oh
hurt.
God, do we have to do this every fucking time we eat together?
We need to get you up.
As you can see, Brad's the more seasoned actor. He never takes a bite of the pizza, ever. Whereas the other two girls kept eating and eating and eating. And by the end of the night, they were both nauseous, and Brad had not taken one bite of pizza. Now this is back to the barn where Michael first saw his mother. When we shot this, it was daylight. The sun was up. We quickly tried to tent the barn, and we tented off this little tiny section where we could slit open the dog. And it works fine. I don't know what Tyler was eating. Some kind of mushed up bread with fake blood, and it was pretty disgusting, whatever it was. We made him eat a lot of gross stuff.
I'll go. I'll always go.
The Brackett house was an actual house. Every room in it is in a room in the house, which was nice because it was a real practical location. Even though we knocked down some walls and restructured the bathrooms because they weren't very shootable. You know, the endless vomiting was pretty funny. Pretty disgusting. She pretty much got it everywhere. I think she broke the toilet actually doing it.
Sorry, I was such a bitch earlier.
I get it.
And now coming up is another moment that I went back and reshot. I had shot this originally of Michael sort of like zoning out and nodding off to sleep. But the sun had come up and ruined the shot and it just didn't match. So we went back and re-grabbed that 6 months later. This was our last day of filming on the whole movie, where I knew that the studio was not going to give us another day to shoot. But I also knew that if I just kept shooting, they wouldn't stop me. So I actually kind of shot 2 days and just called it one day. We just kept shooting. The sun would come up, the sun would go down. The sun would come up, and we just kept shooting and shooting and shooting. Because I knew no one was going to bother to come down and try to stop us. But so we had to just kind of be renegades on that one. This was all sort of improvised at the last minute because what we were going to shoot got changed, and the location we actually had built for all this had gotten washed away by the rains. We were going to film it in this crazy lake bed, and we had built this thing, and it was just destroyed. So at the last minute, we just gathered all of our props on a soundstage, and I just came in and constructed it all. We didn't have very much, so we could only shoot one direction, so we had to take everything, and every time we go to the reverse shot, we're just flipping everything around. Because it was tiny, like we just flipped everything around.
My baby.
And again, another vision of the craziness of Michael's mind and how he dreams and sees the world.
Are you family again?
But I really enjoyed the snow. I always want to shoot in the snow, so I kept adding snow, and the crazy Halloween guys were pretty incredible. And the black crosses, I thought it had kind of a Ken Russell feel. This cartoon was great. We were always trying to find spooky cartoons we could use, and it was just always impossible. No one ever... As soon as people find out what you're using it for, they don't want you to use it, but that one worked out okay. There's Buddy, her teddy bear. And now, everywhere in Georgia was just cool-looking stuff, so we would just shoot tons of cool stuff like this. Actually, this is Connecticut, our entering Haddonfield sign, and him walking off there. We grabbed that a million years later. But we just needed some kind of bridge to show that the approaching storm of Michael was coming.
Please, Sam. Thank you. Well, I could stay a few extra days. It depends on if there's something or someone that motivated me.
Nikki Whalen as the reporter, back in Georgia here in front of the Myers house. And we had gotten clearance on calling everything like 18 Action News. Then suddenly when the movie was done, they're like, oh no, we can't call it 18 Action News. So they actually went in and digitally removed the word action from everything. Every microphone, every van. See, on the van there said Action News, but now it's just like 3 lines, news. So again, it was more like weird screw-ups that were causing us hell. Seems like the less money you have, the more things that go wrong to waste the little money you have.
Explain it to me. I would really like to understand.
I'm selling the sizzle, not the steak.
The sizzle?
This was a hot, steaming hot day from one extreme to the other. It'd be like a freezing cold night, steaming hot day, snowing, raining. But we were always able to match the look pretty well.
Business. Besides, bad taste.
Here we just see what a douchebag that Dr. Loomis has turned into.
You do you?
Yes.
Well, when I want your opinion, I'll beat it out of you. Here, now take that and go sit in the car. Go on, get your ass in there. Okay, hi, where do you want me?
This here was originally shot differently. I was going to use it more like Laurie was having a seizure, and then I decided to use it as a double dream where we think that this is the morning and she's waking up, and then later we find out that she's sort of having a dream within a dream. This here was one of those things that I had this idea one day. I was driving to set, and I just came up there that, oh man, we should recreate the opening scene with Scout playing young Michael. And luckily, young Michael, Chase, and Scout were about the same size, so she fit into his clothes. We quickly found everything. The kitchen layout of the house we used in Pasadena wasn't that different than the one in Georgia, and we just recreated this scene. You know, none of this was prepared. This was all thrown together that morning at the last second. You know, again, I said, Wayne, is there any way we can slit someone's throat? As we did with William Forsythe. And he had a leftover neck appliance that was for another actor and was huge, but we got it to fit around, you know, Danielle Harris, who's obviously has a very tiny neck, but we made it work. And it was just another weird moment that works. And these are exact duplicates of the shots from the first Halloween. And this crazy ranting, one night after we were done shooting, I set up a thing outside where I took both girls and put these strobe lights. We put in contacts, painted blood on their eyes. That brief shot of the Myers grave was also shot on the last night of filming. And I just had the girls scream obscenities straight into camera. I didn't know why. I just thought it would be something that I would use later. It wasn't a master plan. The zooming through the field shot was just a steady cam running through the fields. A big change here is that Laurie wakes up from this dream, and it was a dream. It wasn't a double dream as in the theatrical. She gets up, and we now see that she's been over-medicating herself. She should have her medication, but it's all gone because she's been having more attacks than her therapist realizes. And she's basically been doing a lot of drugs there. Is Lou Martini earlier, as is Frankenstein in the park, entertaining the kids as Laurie goes by. And here's the second therapist scene, which was always my favorite, where we really start to see how far spun out Laurie is getting. That she's not holding it together at all. And she's really losing a grip on everything. And, her rage is building up, her confusion, her everything. That she just wants to medicate herself. She can't deal with Halloween. She can't deal with anything anymore. And she's sort of like having these extreme highs and lows. She's becoming completely manic, lashing out at everybody and everything. 1 second she's happy, 1 second she's not. But she's just descending deeper and deeper. Whereas without these scenes, the fear everybody seemed to have was that, oh, Laurie won't be likable. When in reality, that's really not the issue. I mean, this girl's been through hell. So whether or not she's likable is, to me, irrelevant. I mean, this way it plays much more real that she's gone through hell and she's sinking even deeper. She's losing a complete grip on reality. And I think with these scenes added back in, her journey is, she's actually more sympathetic because you just see how damaged she is. And that nobody really understands how messed up she is. Because it's not just the after effects of her trauma, it's the fact that she's losing her mind in the same fashion as, Michael Myers lost his mind. And we start seeing that she's can't control her anger at anyone anymore. She's just lashing out, wanting drugs here with the therapist, but then she breaks down immediately. This is one of my favorite scenes, and it's very unfortunate it wasn't in the theatrical. I thought it was one of Scout's strongest moments in the movie. And I really missed it, and I'm very happy it's back in here.
How are you, Laurie? I'm so concerned at $100 an hour. You know what? I would be fucking concerned at $100 an hour.
I'm really concerned right now.
Bullshit,
No, it's not bullshit.
You know what?
Please
You're more
stick with
fucked
me.
up than I am, you crazy.
That was a great day for Margot and Scout together. They really knocked that one out of the park. And now, where are we headed? Well, here's another one of our aerial shots of Michael walking, which leads us to Brad watching the news report on television. Originally in the theatrical, we would jump to Laurie was also watching the same news report. But there was an additional scene I had shot where it's another confrontation between Laurie and Annie, that when I started eating away at the relationship of them in the theatrical, you couldn't go here because the anger wasn't justified, wasn't explained. But now we see what's happening. Brad it's the same information here with Brad getting the information about Michael's body being lost back and forth, and we filmed this in front of a light box because we dumped in all the TV stuff later. But here's where we would jump to the Rabbit in Red, but now we jump upstairs where we see that Laurie, who has whose therapist is refusing to give her drugs, is now trying to medicate herself by getting drunk. Anything to just not have to deal with reality. Annie comes in to just try to make some small talk.
What's up with the booze?
And in 1 second, it's already on.
Meet my new best friend.
Meet my new best friend, implying, anyone. The new work friends, just the pushing away of Annie, the new Laurie, the new friends, the new everything.
You know what, Annie?
And then it's on. They just... Finally, Annie cracks and responds with what she's been putting up with for the past 2 years, dealing with Laurie.
You don't need my shit. I put up with your shit 24/7.
And again, I think it's valuable to the movie because you just see, two people that have been through hell. And they're just not equipped to deal with it on any level. And, whereas they should be bonding together, they're at war with each other all the time. And, it's very sad to see their relationship crumble.
I'm not impressed.
And we're about to jump to the Rabbit in Red, which is, of course, where Michael Myers' mom, Deborah, used to work. Now, this billboard, which looks fairly innocent, of the little bunnies and the picture there with Sherry, caused such a stir that 7 different people called 911 to try to shut us down when we were working. This interior here was a strip club close to Atlanta that we shot later, but the exterior was just in some neighborhood, and people were going ballistic with what we were doing, even though it seemed mild to us. Dan Roebuck, Jeff Daniel Phillips as Howard, Sylvia Jeffries as Misty, and there's Big Lou, who was called Lou Martini in the first Halloween, and somehow between the first Halloween, the second Halloween, we lost the rights to the name Lou Martini. So suddenly we had to go through in post and change the TV to Big Lou. Another costly error. But it was happening every time we turned. I'm surprised we had the rights to use 42 Degrees on the screen there. But it was just weird. We were losing rights to use the names of our own characters in some bizarre way.
Green, it suits you, man. It really suits you. It's like the color of money. Ka-ching.
Dumbass.
Hey, Howard, let me ask you a question. I got a riddle for you. What does a stripper do with her asshole before she dances?
I don't know that.
She gives him $10, and she tells him...
So this was all done in Georgia interior, in this really, really disgusting strip club that was probably one of the filthiest places I'd ever gone in. We went in and cleaned it with a cleaning crew just to get it up to the level of disgusting, because it was just beyond. The things we were finding were just hideous. I wouldn't even tell the actors because they wouldn't even step foot in it if they knew how gross it was. But they were kind of wondering why we were all wearing bio hazmat suits. Anyway, Jeff walks out the door, cut to exterior in another location, which we had shot a couple weeks earlier. Freezing cold night. Had rained earlier in the day and then turned to freezing cold. And what was going on here? This was actually Jeff's first night, so he was improvising some stuff in his own. Jeff was really good at coming up with just crazy business. He would develop this whole scenario in his mind about the ex-relationship between him and the stripper, and on and on.
What the fuck you doing?
His encounter with Michael here. Jeff Phillips as the bouncer was actually, I think, one of the first people I cast. He plays the Geico caveman, and I love those commercials. When I found out he was the caveman, I was like, I gotta have that guy. This pretty much plays out as almost exactly as scripted, real.
Look, man.
Here's a funny story here.
Don't give me no reason.
Don't give me no reason. Jeff told me one night he was in, I think it was Pink's in L.A., and he was eating with his friend, and someone came up and asked him for money, and he got all tough and said, "Look, man, don't give me no reason," to scare away this old man who asked him for change. And I guess his friend has been humiliating him on the fact that he scared an old man by saying that, so we had to put it in the movie just to humiliate him further. It was actually his idea, but it's very funny.
Trust me. You're filthy, dirty hippie.
Most of the people that came into audition for the bouncer were just big bouncer types, but I like Jeff because he was really had a lot of bizarre personality and was all barking, no bite. Here we go. Slam. Now that was an unfortunate moment. That was a double, obviously. That was a stuntman. And at that moment, I remember the stuntman made the mishap of saying to Tyler, "Don't worry, you won't hurt me when you slam me down," which Tyler always takes as a challenge to hurt the stuntman for some reason. So he picked that guy up and slammed him down on the ground as hard as he could, and that guy was pretty rattled. I don't think he was expecting that, so there's a couple more scenes of that coming up later in the movie. We had our articulated dummy with the crushed head, which was pretty amazing. Here's a little brief moment coming up that was cut from the theatrical. Nothing. It was more of a beautiful shot and just another surreal moment. You know, it's a nice wipe of frame here, and then we go inside the rabbit in red for just a brief moment of Michael and his mother. Yet I always like this because with the disco ball in the background and the sound effects, it almost seemed like an alien planet they were on.
We're done waiting. Only
You know, and just we start seeing that somehow Michael just, in his mind, he feels his mother is telling him that the more blood he spills, the closer he is to bringing the family back together. And now when we go back inside, this was shot many months later in Connecticut, in a little office building across the street from Friendly's, which is very funny because you'd look outside and there'd be all these families going to Friendly's and having their day, and across the street, they had no idea what we were up to. Bad things, always. Tiny little room, gathered everybody back, built this set, just closed off some walls, and I remember I'd gotten a note from the studio, make sure she's got a bikini on and she's not naked. So I obviously went out of my way to make sure she was completely naked through the whole scene, because that's just my thing. If someone tells me to do something, I'm going to do the exact opposite, just to prove a point. So we kept her completely naked through the whole scene, just because. I mean, because it makes it more disturbing, but also because someone told me not to. We have an insert coming up of, well, first we're going to see the Howard Boggs crushed head dummy, which at one point had gotten cut out of the movie. So when we went back to reshoot, I was very happy to bring it back in because Wayne had put a lot of work into this, and it was pretty fantastic. Now here is an insert of the broken arm, which we shot way, almost right before we released the movie. We shot that little insert and stuck it in there. Again, we had a stuntman to double all this, but we went with the actors, except for one brief moment. This is all Dan Roebuck flailing around and getting slammed into the wall. He was very good at making his arm look broken there, flopping around. Looks like a prosthetic, but it's his real arm just kind of dangling. Tyler throws him pretty hard into the wall here. Now, I feel bad for this girl, Sylvia, who played Misty, because she couldn't, by the end of this night, she could barely walk. Just getting tossed around like that. She was like hobbled out of there like she was 90 years old. Now, the hits on the glass are actually the stunt girl, because she's actually using the force of her body hitting the glass to break it. It wasn't pre-broken or anything like that. We wanted it to be real, so pretty brutal. Brutal to film, brutal to watch. Brutal all the way around. And then we jump back to our exterior that we filmed like 6 months earlier. And here's Dr. Loomis's book, which has now come out, and Sheriff Brackett has bought it. We couldn't close... The reason that we came up with that this is new Loomis, this is old Loomis, and we have the old picture of Malcolm McDowell in the back of the book is that Malcolm's actual deal to be in the movie didn't close until about 10 seconds before he was supposed to shoot, so we never got to take new photos of him in order to have him in the movie, so we had to go back and use old photos. So that's when that happened. I kind of rewrote the dialogue about new Loomis, old Loomis, because it didn't really make sense to have the old pictures. And those are the things that we'd have to do basically 24/7, because nothing ever went according to plan, so you had to just roll with the punches, and every time there was a mistake, you had to figure out a way to make the mistake seem like an important plot point or something that obviously you did intentionally. Here was the one restaurant in town that everybody seemed to like to eat at that was staying there working on the crew. We turned it into a bookstore, but it was actually an Italian restaurant that everybody really liked. I don't remember ever eating there, but so when you go inside, it's just a restaurant. Here's a scene that got cut originally because everybody seemed so up in arms to be able to see Michael Myers' face in the daylight. I never thought it was a problem because we've completely, recreated the legend of Michael Myers. He's not the boogeyman in the shadows. He's this other creature, he's a living, breathing person. So I had no problem with it, but, and once it came out, I missed it. But this is the one moment where we really understand Michael's conscious of Dr. Loomis being out there in the world. Because remember, every time his mother speaks, it's his own thoughts. And she tells him by seeing this big billboard that he's still out there, rich and famous, all because of their pain.
He's still out there.
And we understand now through this scene what Michael actually does understand, that he is conscious of everything that's going on. He's not just wandering around like a big lug. So, once that got lost, we kind of lost again Michael's sort of like surrogate father approach to Dr. Loomis. Every time we tried to film something, everything was out of business. So we scouted this bookstore and we go, okay, great, we're going to shoot here. By the time we got to shooting 3 weeks later, the store was out of business and abandoned and gone, and it was just an empty room. So we had to come in and rebuild an entire bookstore. And as we were shooting, people kept coming to our set thinking, they were like, oh, great, the store's reopened. They were so happy. We had to break the news to them that actually it was just fake. And there's Chet wearing his WWMD shirt, What Would Michael Do? Which came up in another scene, but I cut it out. Came up in the press conference, but it came out. And obviously, I put him in there first so that Loomis could encounter a wacky fan, so that when Robert Curtis Brown, who is Linda's dad from the first movie, steps up and he seems like a very, normal, regular guy, Loomis's guard is down. In the cup he's holding was blood, and I was going to have him... We did a couple of takes where he threw blood on Loomis, and then I came up with the idea, like, well, not only is that not that big of a deal, but it's a real pain in the ass to keep having to change Malcolm's shirt after every take. And it never lands the same, and it was just a pain. So then I thought, well, maybe he should just pull a gun. So our prop guy went out to the truck and got a gun, and we've changed the scene, and it was one of those changes that's so much for the better. Just changed the dynamic of everything, made it much more intense to think that this, this LL Bean style, suburban dad had been pushed to the edge where he's going to go to a bookstore and shoot somebody. And it made the whole scene just 10 times more intense.
You son of a bitch! I'm gonna kill you, Loomis! I'm gonna kill you, goddammit!
More of our aerial day. We filmed everything we could that day, though we had that helicopter.
Part of the job, I suppose.
Again, Malcolm gets to ride around in a limo. All Malcolm's days were sweet. He was in a hotel room, a limo, a conference room. It was always good. He was always happy. And obviously we couldn't fit many people in this, so it was just the two actors, me, and, on that one, my DP, Brandon Tross, was operating. We're all jammed in the car driving around, filming all this. And these guys were great together, Mary and Malcolm really had good chemistry together and worked well together.
There's going to be serious repercussions.
And we start seeing the first cracks in Dr. Loomis's conscience. This was, we shot this quickly right after the bookstore scene. This is the parking lot right behind the bookstore. Our prop guy was freaking out because he only had one copy of the book. And he didn't realize Scout was going to pound it against the steering wheel until it was destroyed. And then he had to quickly figure out how to make more. Because why would we possibly need more than one? What could go wrong? Anyway, it all worked. Here's just more shots of Michael Myers walking that we stole everywhere. Back to the bracket house at night. Laurie comes rushing in, some bad brains cranking in the background. We were quickly running out of time this night, so we shot this very simply. Tried to play it in just as fewer shots as possible, even though I have a tendency to want to get things from as many possible angles as I can.
You did it. No, what? Fuck it. I mean, Daddy's little princess knows all, right?
What are you talking about? Hey, stop! Calm down. Look at me. What is going on? Let me just call my dad, okay? We could talk to him.
And the mystery of Angel Myers continues. Obviously, Annie knows nothing about it as Laurie is spinning out of control.
Angel! Laurie!
And Diamond Head song, Am I Evil? Which we had filmed this all to another song, which we had the rights to, but at the end of the day, our music budget ran out. We couldn't use it, so that was kind of a drag because it was all synced to a certain song. But this song worked just as good.
I want you to head over to my house and keep an eye on Annie for me, okay?
Oh, boss, last year she tried to kick me in the nuts. You know she's not gonna like this.
We had filmed a lot more stuff in the police station, I remember, with the cops, Bill Faberbach. You know, just some chit-chat going back and forth between the cops. But I cut most of it out because the tone of it, it was all good stuff. It just got too light. Here's an exterior that we built that was very cool that led into an art gallery, and then jump ahead to something we filmed in another location. We filmed all this dialogue in the same day as the therapist scene, so some very heavy scenes that we had to do all in the same day.
Look, I just found something out that's kind of freaking me the fuck out.
Okay, what is it?
And here we go, you know, she starts revealing that she's Angel Myers, Michael Myers' sister, and I thought this scene worked out great because this had the potential to become really silly. And here's Harley coming out, dressed as, you know, Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror Picture Show, although I don't think technically we ever had the right to say that. That's why we don't say it. But obviously the costumes are exactly the same, and that was always the intention.
I don't mean you understand what the fuck I'm saying.
Not really.
Coming up here, you can see a mistake that happened with the prop book that for some reason they could never solve the mystery of. When she's flipping through the book, you can see the face of Daig, who played young Michael Myers in the first movie, who by the second movie had gotten so big it was inconceivable that he could play young Michael Myers. You'll see it briefly when Laurie flips through the book. I mean, if you freeze frame it, you'll see it. If you won't really notice it. But coming up, see, flips the page, boom, boom, quick shot of Daig. Go back and freeze frame it. But I don't know, for some reason the wrong photos were in the book. That never really got fixed, but it's no big deal.
Dude. This is fucking insane.
Our next guest gained infamy.
This was all filmed on the day in the hotel. This was all very spontaneous. We found a little TV station, and we actually used a lot of their sets that were just lying around and reconfigured them for the talk show. And my intention here, though, was to try to think of a way to underscore the seriousness of Dr. Loomis as a doctor. And I thought, what better to have him with Weird Al Yankovic? You know, I mean, you can't be a serious doctor be doing these chat shows. And the Weird Al thing was a last-minute thing. Again, I was talking to Chris Hardwick, who plays David Newman, who was coming in to do this, and I had the idea we need another guest on the couch with Dr. Loomis, but we didn't have anybody. And he was like, well, I had dinner with Weird Al last night. Maybe he'll do it. And we asked Al, and he said sure, and he flew in the next day. He didn't even think twice about it. He came in, he improvised some little things with Chris Hardwick, which we filmed, and he was fantastic. Real trooper, and nailed it. You know, basically wore his own clothes. That was the one condition he wanted, that he could wear his own clothes, and came in and did his thing. Lobby of the same building, obviously.
Nonsense. No. Good night. Thank you.
This was a really crazy night. This was one of those nights where everything was melting down. Nothing was working. The monitors were not working. The sound was not working. So I kept having to run up and look through the camera, run back, and run all around because we always shoot with two cameras. And it's really difficult. And, you know, nothing was working, so it was really hard to tell we were even filming. This little kid was hilarious. He was tiny, and he never really acted, and we were trying to tell him what to do, and somehow he turned all Hollywood on us in one heartbeat. We're like, okay, you know, we're trying to talk to him like a little kid, like, okay, you know, just run down here and stop when you get here. And he just looked at us like, don't worry, I know how to hit my mark, man. So he was, even though he had done, like, nothing, he was already jaded Hollywood player.
I've spent my whole fucking life being good, and look where it's gotten me. Fucking nowhere.
Back to Laurie Strode in Maya's house,
Hey, you guys.
deciding that she wants to party. This was someone's house. They actually lived there, but it didn't look like this. It was this weird house that was filled from floor to ceiling with like stuff. Like tons of like the guys sold stuff in yard sales or something, so he had to have like 10,000 Tupperware containers and all kinds of stuff. It was the most pack rat house I'd ever seen, and we went in and it took 2 days just to empty this guy's crap out of his house. Then we went in and repainted the whole house and turned it into like hipster, punk rock girl pad, but it was pretty funny. Well, coming up is the Phantom Jam, which was a very, very crazy night to film. It was supposed to be 4 nights of shooting, and it turned into 1. So we had to cram in a lot. And now we're at the Phantom Jam on stage. Captain Clegg and the Night Creatures, which is a fictitious band created by Jesse Dayton specifically for the film. These scenes were shortened for the theatrical, but I felt that really when I sat in the theater and watched it, they needed to be longer, because we really do a lot of build up to the Phantom Jam, and then to me it felt like it just whizzed by. And I really liked the idea that for a brief moment that it becomes like a rock concert movie, and you really feel that these girls are out in a real place, and you want to just get a break from it. And there's so much death and carnage. It's just fun to see Laurie out with her new friends trying to find a way to deal with. This is her way of dealing with the fact that she just found out she's Michael Myers' sister. She's going to go out, party until she drops dead. She doesn't care anymore. And when these scenes got tightened up, I just feel like that a lot of that just went away with it. It just became flashy business for no real reason. So we've extended all these scenes some, just so you're just more in the place as it's happening, rather than just quick snippets.
Andy, are you seriously?
Which brings us back out to the Brackett house, the complete opposite of what's going on. Annie is like dealing with her regular life. Her dad has sent a cop to sit outside the house again, as he did last year, because in this version, of course, this is 2 years after the murders, not 1. And of course, nobody wants to deal with the boss's daughter, because she's quite a piece of work and pretty aggressive.
I'm shaking in my boots.
And in this version also, Uncle Seymour Coffins has more to do. I made him more on stage more because I thought he really gave the movie, really grounded it, because Jeff got on stage and really did this whole routine. Very little of it was scripted. The audience didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know. Nobody knew. And it really just gives it the flavor that you need to you start feeling like it's real. And again, when it got tightened up, I just felt like, it just didn't have the vibe. It felt like we were rushing through everything, and it drives me crazy. I think people are more patient when they watch movies at home than they are in a theater sometimes, because you can pause it and go to the bathroom and come back, and so they're willing to invest themselves more. And also, as time went on, I realized that even though the character of Wolfie, played by Matt Bush here, was brief, he seemed to really score points every time he opened his mouth. Everything he said was pretty funny. People seemed to be pretty memorable. People seemed to like him. So we extended these scenes a little bit where, he's at the party dressed as Wolfman, acting like he's a player. But now that he's got this girl who's like 10 times more aggressive than him, once he gets her back to the van, he doesn't know what to do with her. She's going to tear him apart. There's a scene of a water tower that got cut. I just thought it added some nice scope to the van as we're walking towards it.
Had a lot of fun in this van.
The structure of this is similar to the theatrical, except everything is broadened. There's just a little more. We jump back and forth between the interior of the Phantom Jam a few more times, and stretches it out and lets Uncle Seymour breathe. He's telling his disgusting jokes.
There is no difference.
To the horror of everybody. He's not really funny, but he's funny because he's not funny. And he seems to be getting drunker and drunker as the night progresses. He looks sweatier and messier. And, here's a Wolfie trying to impress Harley with his van.
Yeah? The ladies love it?
That he gets a lot.
I get a good
But
amount.
nobody's buying it. We're back inside with our...
A blonde and a jack-o'-lantern both have 3 holes.
Uncle Seymour's clearly overstaying his welcome on stage and starting to get uncomfortable to watch. You can tell the crowd just wants the band to play, but he's now drunk and won't get off stage. And I think it actually helps create tension in the movie when we jump back and forth between these scenes here, where now we have this uncomfortable sort of like
I like your tattoos.
weird romance going on where Wolfie's trying hard to make conversation, but it's pathetic. And then, Harley keeps coming on stronger and stronger, and he's getting weirder and weirder.
That's nice. That's nice.
And she's getting fed up. Now Uncle Seymour's being heckled by the audience, and it's getting even more tense on stage. And then finally, Harley just decides to take charge of the situation. Fairly minor changes, but just enough to give each scene enough room, a little more room to breathe, and you just feel the characters in their world more. And, it's all the difference sometimes.
Where the fuck are you going? I gotta take a piss. I don't have to pee since I got here. I'll be right back.
This was another sacrifice scene that was supposed to take place outdoors and was a big elaborate scene, but again, we got rained out and lost some of our shooting days, so we quickly had to reconfigure this into this van sequence that worked out good, but it wasn't what was in the script. It was sort of like what I had to come up with on the spot. And he's taking a whiz, and of course Michael's going to appear. Wha-boom. We cranked the film a little bit there just so Michael would come flying in out of nowhere. Here we could see, I couldn't decide what would be scarier, seeing Michael slowly approaching in the background and she's oblivious, or just having him fly in out of nowhere. So what I did here is I went through and digitally removed Michael, so that when he breaks the window, he really just kind of appears out of nowhere until the glass actually breaks. And we just intercut it with the kids dancing, just like, they're partying on while their friends getting strangled in the parking lot. All good fun. A lot of business for one night to shoot, but we got it done. This was, again, back at the same hotel, so everything, the stuff with Weird Al, the press conference, the lobby, anything with Loomis was all shot in one day at this one hotel. So we actually were... This was another scene that I made up on the spot, because we had another scene where Loomis was at a radio station and he finds out the news about Michael Myers and all this business. But then those days got cut from the script, so again, I had to figure out a way to get Loomis from here to there. And we were shooting in that hotel, and I thought, well, maybe they'll let us use one of the suites upstairs for free, and we can run upstairs and film Loomis in a hotel room. So I got this as an extra shot to see him watching the TV, and then later he's in the other room in the suite, and he sees the news report about Michael Myers. This scene in particular coming up, we definitely needed more space, because I felt that, Laurie running lost drunk in the crowd just needed more room to breathe. We came back in so quick that I felt that people were almost confused as to what they were watching. But now it goes on long enough, you realize she's drunk, she's lost. She's separated from Maya, she doesn't know what's going on. The band is now morphed into these creatures. She does, and she's about to have her first vision of Deborah Myers. And, we see this is real. I guess this is really the first moment in the movie where she's really, really losing her grip on reality. She's seeing things. She's having the same visions as her brother. Always in the snow. This is the point where Laurie starts, in a way, mind melding with her brother and starts beginning to see the same things he sees. Because I figured, if Michael Myers is crazy, then Angel Myers would be crazy too. So that she starts seeing the same thing he sees. That was quickly done one day. I remember what the scene with Sherry and Chase there. Took us almost 20 minutes to light it, and we were freaking out that we were wasting so much time. Because our schedule was so tight that basically, if we stopped and took a breath, we would fall so radically behind schedule that We basically lit everything and then just shot. We never tweaked the lighting almost ever. That was one great thing about the way it was lit. We never had time to readjust stuff. We were always shooting. In fact, we were getting complaints that we were shooting too much film. Now back at the Brackett house. Where I believe we forgot to shoot the other side of this phone call, so we just stole some random snippets of Brad talking and just sort of cut him into what she was saying so it sounded like he was on the phone. And this here with Greg, he's coming down and obviously Michael's going to step out from the tree and strangle him.
I love you too.
And what was funny is that Tyler's so huge, but he really could, he hid behind that tree and you couldn't see him even if you were standing right there. It was so dark and it was pretty cool. And we kept delaying it longer and longer because, you know, Greg always wanted to know, well, when is he going to grab me? And I never want the actors to know when another actor is going to grab them because then they're all ready for it and they tend to want to like over-respond. So, you know, gave him time to light a cigarette and stand around and then suddenly he grabbed him. He never knew when it was coming. It's very dark out there shooting sometimes. We had almost no light. The only light we had going was that porch light in the background. Now coming up here, let's see what's happening. I remember we weren't going to have, don't think in the script there was any moment where Michael attacks Annie. There was just going to be the aftermath. And then I realized it wasn't enough because at that point the Annie character kept becoming more and more significant. You know, sometimes you write things in a script and you just don't know how they're going to pan out and then you start shooting and certain things appear. Michael in the mirror. You know, in here I didn't want to have him, we filmed him kind of running after her and doing things, but it, you know, just the size difference in the people made it almost silly. So I decided to slow it down, to just have him wipe frame and give a little bit of what happens and then, you know, fade out and all we hear is what takes place in the house. You know, the chaos of the attack. And then later I will flash back to it briefly, but I didn't want to just have it play out because there was really, we had created such a horribly bloody aftermath that I couldn't really think of anything that would live up to it, so it was better to leave it to the audience's imagination of how she got to that state. You know, we always tried to use practical lighting. As you can see, there's a light in the back there to light everything. We never really threw up any lights to light anything. It was always just sort of like if there was light on the house or headlights to light things to keep it real. There's our dead officer in the car, who was very bad at holding his breath.
Hey, world! Guess what?
And coming up here is another scene that was cut from the theatrical because it felt like we just, at this point in the movie, maybe we just wanted to get it going on and you know, and keep the pace going. But after having more time to sit back and live with the movie, I actually felt like we needed to settle down for a second and have a moment with, you know, a good moment with Laurie and Maya before Maya's demise. And there's just a little brief scene in the kitchen where Laurie's clearly drunk and
The place is like spinning.
she's going to stop and make tea for them both. It's, you know, it's a short little scene, but it just lets the world that we're in calm down. And also as the audience, you know that Annie has been murdered upstairs, but they're oblivious to it as they're down in the kitchen making tea. We don't know if Michael Myers is in the house or not. He could be gone, he could be there, you know. But then we find out as they look past here, coming up.
Oh, yeah, it does. It's okay. I'll sleep like a baby.
Michael's still in the house. So now, you know, it's just a matter of time before bad things happen. It's just nice. I like it. It's just one good last moment with Maya before things turn bad. As Laurie says, Cookie's not going to save her now.
I don't think a cookie's gonna save me. My head.
At this point, the floor is all flooded, and you'll see later that when Brea tries to run out of the room, she slips in the water because it was very slippery. But you can't, the water doesn't read that great on film. And here is the snippets of the attack that I filmed of Michael destroying the room and attacking Annie. But I always thought it was more effective to just have these quick blasts come flying in rather than, really show it. And then a little quick moment of this. That was one of my favorite moments. Where they just were backlit by that cool fan. And then again, as in the first film, Laurie comes home to find Annie lying on the floor, horribly messed up. And now you'll see as she runs out of the room, she falls in the water. And run, slip, boom, floor's all wet. Whenever actors tend to fall down and stuff, if it works, I always use it because it's the most real they're ever going to run. Because after that, they always run more careful. Now, this was some really great stuff in here with Scout and Danielle. They were very terrific together.
She's upstairs. She's, I don't know if she's okay.
As always, we're always shooting through things, trying to make it claustrophobic. It's very dark. It's very, very gnarly. Never very wide open. Tiny, tiny little bathroom with 2 cameramen jammed in there, shoved up under the toilet, all over the place. Now, coming up here is another one of these stuntman challenges that I spoke of earlier. She runs out, she gets grabbed, pulled back in, and then the stunt guy was like, "Don't worry, just slam her down on the table. She'll be fine. She's got a back pad on." We had retractable knives, but we never used them because they're always too wimpy and they always break. So I put down a big block of wood next to the actress, and Tyler was just stabbing as hard as possible into this big block of wood. So that way we could really feel the force of, how powerful he actually is. As opposed to carefully trying to stab somebody with a retractable knife, which always looks ridiculous.
Hold on, baby. Hold on.
Andy's gonna smell this on my clothes and kill me.
Again, a nice big empty town square. We could do whatever we wanted. Beautiful shots. And there's Renee, Tyler's wife again, who was the officer earlier on. I gave her this kind of like Princess Leia hairdo just so that I wanted each cop to be memorable in some way. So when they don't just seem like extras. And, you do a simple thing like give someone a slightly weird hairdo, and when they pop up again later, people totally remember them.
Baby. Annie, stay with me.
This is one of my favorite scenes, very effective, because in these type of movies, usually when people die, you don't care, you don't feel anything, but I thought these two together here you really feel as if her friend is dying, and you really feel like she dies. It's not just like fun for the, fun slasher movie crap. And the music is, I recycled the music from the first Halloween when Deborah Myers commits suicide watching the old Super 8 movies of young Michael. Because that was a very sad moment in that movie, and that music was very effective, so I thought it'd be good to reprise that here.
Don't leave me, babe.
And another funny moment is coming up here. Not that it seems like it'd be funny, but again, somehow the information didn't make it to the construction crew that they were supposed to make a breakaway door. So that door was supposed to be made out of balsa wood so Tyler could break through it. But again, somehow someone cut the balsa wood from the budget, and they just put up a completely thick oak door, of which no one told me, nor Tyler or anyone. So Tyler actually, he was pissed when he came to that door, but he actually smashed his way through an actual locked door that was not breakaway in any way, shape, or form. So he was not happy as usual. Now, I had an extended scene of Michael chasing Laurie outside here in the woods, But not to keep harping on it, but when so many of our shooting days got cut, that was the days that got cut. So really, I had to get creative in how she was chased, and that's why I decided to use that sort of backlit, bizarre shot and do the cross dissolves leading to here. This is quite different. This is actually back to a version that's almost the first version that me and Glenn Garland, the editor, cut. And I don't know why. When we previewed this, people just didn't seem to get it, and I didn't understand why, and I always felt that we were right. So we put it back to the original version where Sheriff Brackett finding his daughter in the bathroom really plays out. I thought Brad was particularly strong that night, his acting, and I just think what happened was the emotion coming through was uncomfortable for people, and then you get sort of like, people tend to laugh sometimes when they're uncomfortable. And there was another feature that was put in here where, you know, he looks at his dead daughter who he loves so much. We have these brief flashbacks of her as a child, which seem for some reason to confuse everyone. I don't know why, but, you know, now that it's time to do the real version of the movie, you know, it's great and it works perfect. So I'm glad it's back because it says, you know, everything is right there. The reality of the death is what I wanted to have here because, again, like I said, a lot of times in these movies, people die and horrible things happen, and it's like we're not even supposed to care. And for him to see his daughter there and the way, you know, but he still sees her as a little, you know, this little girl that he always wanted to protect, and now he failed. You just feel the weight on him. And then to intercut it with Laurie running, the other girl he swore to protect, and he failed there too. She's off running away from the killer, and he's just a mess. It's just a much stronger scene when you let it play out longer, as usual. We shot this on our last night of filming behind the production office because we realized we didn't have any connection to get her out of the woods onto the road. And there was this tiny plot of trees behind where we had our production office. And we just kept running her through the same tiny little area over and over. And this is our one field that we shot earlier in the production that would later be used. Now in the script, it calls for a road that's raised up so that the car can stop and Michael can tip a car down the road. But I never realized how flat Georgia is. It was almost impossible to find a road that had any sort of embankment that a car could fall down. This was the steepest embankment we could find anywhere. And it was, you know, I mean, it was maybe 10 feet. I mean, it works great, but again, it was the only thing we could find. Blasting on the radio is this old DC hardcore band called Void that I used to really like, so it was cool that they let us use their song in the movie. And again, this was another like weird night where things weren't going right, and as usual, but it all worked out good. We had a car that we were supposed to tip, but the car didn't actually match the car that we were using in the movie, so our double car was a different car. And so we were kind of screwed. I think you can see some of the differences. The car that drives up is a 4-door, then the other car's a 2-door. There's lots of inconsistencies, but I was sort of hoping if people were caught up in the scene, they wouldn't notice all the problems with the cars. Obviously, Tyler didn't actually pick up a car. We had a crane helping, and then we digitally removed the cable that was helping him tip it. And here's our tiny little embankment. We got like basically, you know, one roll, boom. That's as far as we get it to fall, but I mean, you know, I guess any more and Laurie's head would have got crushed. I left the horn beeping for so long, which everybody told me was really annoying because where I live in California, there seems to be an accident every week on my street corner, and that's always the sound you hear after an accident. Someone's horn always gets jammed on, so I thought that's what I always associate with accidents. It's very, very annoying, but it's real. And I don't think you could see it because I think I cut out a second before, but the car is going to blow up, and right as it blows up, Chase bursts out laughing. You can No, I got out just before he laughed. But you could see it was very funny. I mean, he was having a blast, but I don't know why he found the explosion so funny. Here's the shack that is built on a sound stage because we got rained out, so we had to run and rebuild the shack indoors. But nobody can tell. Brief scene here with Brad and his deputy. Brad and Bill here had a really good, vibe they had together here, but they didn't have too many scenes, but I always liked them together. Brad was particularly strong in all of his scenes. He really took the role seriously. I think more so than the first time around. Once he saw the finished version of the first Halloween, he really understood what we were going for.
I think maybe you should drive.
Yes, sir. People, roll out. Going to Eagle Road.
Now we're intercutting with the shack, which obviously Laurie is fully believes that these people she's seeing are alive in front of her and holding her down when clearly they're all in her mind.
Repeat after me. I love you, Mommy. I love you, Mommy.
This was something that was written like the day before, because there was a whole other thing I had concocted where there wasn't just one young Michael Myers, there was many, and there was like, they were everywhere. So it was like there was, but then I thought, well, it's just going to be a million little kids everywhere. And so we just came up with the, just the one young Michael and the I love you, Mommy. Now these are all just lighting effects, obviously, and then we would film this again outside later with an actual helicopter. So when Michael looks up, we think this is just insanity in his mind. And then he looks up and sees a helicopter. Of course, this was terrible for sound at all times. So we had to loop much of this later, especially Sherry's lines, because she's speaking so softly that the wind machines and everything were always crushing her dialogue. Here we are back in our free hotel suite we got that we decided to utilize. This is when I could not figure out how does Dr. Loomis know what's going on, because then I realized, well, he just sees it on TV. It's like everybody else.
Incredible. I can't believe what I'm reporting, but a man who police believe to be deceased.
And we just quickly did that day spontaneously. We just put a green screen on the TV and later dropped in all this action.
Miss Strode allegedly shot and killed Myers herself after being abducted on Halloween night. And as if this story couldn't get more twisted, it was revealed earlier today that Miss Strode...
Down the corner you can see the actual fire department putting out our exploding car. Now all this is from the original shoot, but coming up is some of the stuff that we shot during reshoots. This was a very freezing cold night. The ground was so cold that your feet would just freeze standing there. It was just miserable.
Fucking time.
Chief.
Everybody's wearing jackets and they're fine, but I felt bad for the girls because Scout and Sherry were freezing to death out there.
Sheriff! Oh.
I know Malcolm did not want Brad to punch him, but he had to.
There's an innocent girl in there I might have kept safe. But for your greed.
And I tried to keep Malcolm and Brad away from each other for the whole movie until here because they had a lot of scenes together in the last movie, and I thought, like, let's just keep the tension up till the last final moment when they finally meet again, to where Brackett can unload on Loomis his hatred of everything he's done.
I wanted to help.
There is nothing that you have to say that I want to hear.
Sheriff, please. You must trust me. Look, this is pointless.
Michael's never going to respond to hostility.
And again, this was a pretty elaborate scene to shoot with the helicopters and all these extras and the cars we shot it all in one night. And in fact, it had been so rainy that we had to just guess where we were going to put the cars in advance because we couldn't actually drive onto the field because all the cars were actually stuck in the mud. So, besides crunching our time, we were always trying to guess what we might want to be doing just because the weather was killing us every step of the way. Now, when he steps in the shack, obviously this is him entering the shack that we shot on stage several weeks earlier. with the lighting effects that we then had to match outside. Now this is the original ending of the movie, which is quite different from the theatrical. But usually what was your gut reaction and what you originally set out to do is the best way to go. You know, people get in, they start second guessing, things get jerked around, and you know, you get crazy and you make decisions. But I always like this. I liked both endings. I thought both worked, but this one was our movie. This was like the dark journey of Laurie Strode. It was not like a slasher movie where everyone has to get killed. So here, you know, we see what's heating up inside the shack. Michael turns towards Loomis, and then we're outside, and we don't know what's going on. It's tense. The cops are waiting. Nobody knows. And there's a big moment coming up that I thought was significant that, again, was lost in the new ending, where Michael explodes through the wall holding Loomis. Michael knows he's going to die, but he wants to he takes his mask off, shows his face, and speaks for the first time in 20 years to Loomis, and then stabs him. And then the police open fire. And it just feels more tragic. You know, I always felt sympathy for Michael, for Laurie, for everyone. It's just a tragic event, and it's just more, you know, you don't have to feel bad for Michael Myers, but you're dealing with characters that have no grip on reality, so in some way you do feel bad for them. And then, after he is clearly dead, Laurie comes stumbling out in a state of shock, yet still is possessed by the visions of Deborah Myers, because she is now completely gone over into Michael Myers' mind state. And we just sense through now this is originally what Brad was looking at, so the reactions play more true. He just sees, and there's a great shot here where, as Laurie walks by, Big Michael and Little Michael are lying on the ground. She still sees that the little Michael is dead on the ground. So she sees both versions of her brother dead. And she picks up the knife because she's going to, even though we don't know if Loomis is dead or not, although we assume he is, she's going to take up the knife, which is like the passing of the baton to Laurie from Michael. But before she can, you know, act on it, a trigger-happy cop kills her. So in this version of the movie, which for me was very final, you know, Laurie is killed. And the only person to survive the movie is Sheriff Brackett, who has failed. You know, his daughter has died, and the other girl he swore to protect, Laurie Strode, is dead. And we end on this sort of like triangle of death on the ground with Michael, Laurie, and Loomis. And as we push into Laurie's face, and another significant thing here is the Love Hurts song, which was one of the first things I did for the movie, this idea of using this song, which was also in the first movie. But once we had the new ending, it didn't make sense anymore. But here, it's tragic, and it is our movie. And as we push it on Laurie's face, we know she's dying. She's not dead yet, but she's dying. And we push into her face, and her last thoughts are zooming down the white hallway as she's dying. So it's not really a sanitarium she's been put away to. It's just her final thoughts as she dies, which is why it's so surreal. And again, rather than rushing through this longer version plays out much longer and plays off the song much better. And I just thought it was a much more classic, tragic ending. But sometimes the problem is, you know, when you have a movie like Halloween, people are expecting certain things, and when you try to take it in another direction, you know, you really have to change people's perceptions of what they want to see. So just before, you know, it all ends, she has her final vision with the white horse, and then we fade out, and she's died. You know, she's faded away. She's died. You know, Laurie's dead. It's not that she's crazy and she's in a mental hospital. Everybody's gone. And the song, which we remember from the first movie, really the lyrics now take on a whole new meaning in this really depressing way that it's been re-recorded. And you know, it's much more tragic ending rather than just this crazy stab-a-thon. And I think, you know, that's why all these additional scenes really give you a completely different movie. It's a different emotional journey about a character named Laurie Strode. It's not a slasher movie about Michael Myers, and that's what we set out to make, and that's what we made. So that's why I believe this version is much stronger. And that is that. Still ending with the, you know, working. I think it works even better. Rather than playing the John Carpenter music, you have the Love Hurts playing over the death scenes from both movies, and it's even more tragic. And that is the end of that. Thank you. I'm Rob Zombie. Thank you for watching Halloween 2 with me. Goodbye.